The U.S. presidential election between Democratic nominee Kamala Harris and Republican nominee Donald Trump is expected to be incredibly close. With that in mind, the National wanted to get a look at what U.S. voters are thinking as they head to the polls, so we, along with Deltapoll, surveyed a little more than 3,000 adults in the U.S. to see what's on the minds of many as those voters head to the ballot box. First off, let's look at the issue dominating headlines, and rightfully so. That's the war in Gaza. We're looking at how that's perceived by U.S. voters. We asked, how important would you say the war in the Middle East is in determining which candidate you support? 35% of Americans we surveyed say the war in the Middle East is very important when deciding who they're going to vote for. 36% of those we contacted say it's fairly important. So that's more than half who recognize Gaza as an issue on the minds to some extent when they go to the polls. However, 16% say it's not very important, and 7% say it's not important at all. We also asked, would you support or oppose the next U.S. president making a public demand for a ceasefire to take place in Gaza? 59% of those surveyed want to see a full ceasefire take place in Gaza, 20% oppose the idea of a ceasefire, while 21% just aren't sure. Here's where there's a stark difference. For those supporting Harris, 71% want to see a ceasefire, while less than half of Trump supporters, 48%, would like to see one. We also asked those voters if they would support the recognition of an independent state of Palestine. 57% of Kamala Harris supporters said they supported that push for an independent Palestinian state. For Donald Trump supporters, that number, however, drops to 30%. Those surveyed were also asked who would bring a swifter end to the war in the Middle East, either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. On that issue, 46% said that Donald Trump would expedite an end to the war, while 41% believe that Kamala Harris would bring an end to the war faster. 13% of those surveyed aren't sure. But let's take a step back for a moment. We also asked those surveyed to tell us the most important issues they face on a day-to-day basis. Prices, along with the cost of living, took a commanding lead on this question, along with the overall economy. Immigration, healthcare, reproductive rights, housing, and crime were also mentioned, but again, voters we spoke with are clearly most concerned about the cost of living and overall finances, which led us to ask those surveyed which candidates would be most effective on economic and cost of living issues. 50% say Kamala Harris would be the best. Trump is within striking distance on this, however, with 45% saying he'd be better for economic issues, and 5% of those surveyed, again, aren't sure. And of course, what this all comes down to, the big question, which candidate do you support? Kamala Harris with a slight lead. 51% of those with whom we spoke say they'll be voting for her. Donald Trump is within the margin of error of the poll, however, with 48% of supporters, while 1% say they'll be supporting a third-party candidate. For those we surveyed in swing states, however, we should point out Trump has a very slight lead, but again, within the margin of error ratio, meaning this election is still within both candidates' grasp. And that's just scratching the surface of our poll. You can take a deep dive into all the numbers and what it means for November 5th on our website, thenationalnews.com.